Brian, ready? Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. I would like to call this HR committee meeting together. It's January 23rd, 10 a.m. Noting all committee members are here. Starting, I need approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
And in approving the agenda, I would like to note that we have public comments from the WTA, and instead of reading them in their entirety, I would like to note them as we get to the agenda item, if that's okay with everybody.
Okay.
Okay, so all in favor of the approval of the agenda with that note, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. So those are, I didn't receive any other public comments, Fran?
I did not either.
Okay, great. So the first agenda item is discussion of additional compensation for planning. And I would like to read what the WTA has commented in that section. This is addressed to the members of the HR committee. We appreciate the difficult situation with which we are faced today as we work through the numerous challenges presented by the 2020-21 school year. We understand that no matter how the school year starts, we will be returning to district buildings with students at some point this year. This understanding has raised many questions with our colleagues. As we are sure staff members have been sharing their concerns with you, the WTA has also heard from many individuals with concerns regarding a safe return to school buildings. We would like to present to you our subsequent considerations. Under the additional compensation for planning, the description is discussion of different models to provide additional compensation to workers for work in the preparation for the 2021 school year. Bullet point 1, consider a September 8th start for students, allowing staff time to prepare and plan for the selected learning model without requiring additional compensated days. This would include all staff, paras, health assistants, etc. An alternative option could be offering curriculum pay up to a set number of hours. Bullet point 2, consider suspending the financial penalty for resigning during the summer as currently outlined by the intent to return letter. Bullet point 3, under a virtual model, consider offering staff a stipend for utilizing their own hardware, internet, rather than purchasing new equipment for short-term use. And the last bullet point, consider how co-curricular assignment duties will be paid, especially if the duties associated with the coaching or advising position are altered or reduced. Comments? Okay, so Brian, what do you have to offer?
This, part of it came up as a subject during the board meeting. A couple members had mentioned different ideas. Mark followed up with some further questions, and to kind of related to the comments that he made at the school board meeting of, would there be something else to look at in terms of, an hourly, some sort of an hour, paying staff for some additional hours of planning, preparation time. He also asked the question about, would it be possible to offer points potentially for a subject for that idea. And I guess one of the things that Steve had responded to his email about points with I think a very good point, a very good point to the points. In that, I think if we're talking about offering people points for doing this additional work outside of the year, we're really talking most likely about that being paid out over a much longer period of time, and even to the extent that it extends to a retirement payout. In that, how we have been paying points to teachers we've really been delaying that payment instead of continually paying it every year. focusing more on the salary negotiations being first based on CPI, and then, getting it to a number that puts us in a really competitive spot in Dane County by using points to raise it to that next level. And so, I think if, we were to talk about points, I think we really want to make sure we're understanding that it's probably a delayed reward to staff.
Can we talk about how much planning may go into the different models? So, to me, it's very hard to answer, to respond to this, because we don't know what we're going to ask them to do.
I can answer some of that, Joan. I mean, some of this is obviously still in our, it's model specific, I think, in many respects. I mean, because one of the things we have to do, regardless of which model we land in, is we have to plan for virtual.
Yes.
That is an absolute piece that has to be put in place. We're moving forward with a number of technology purchases to try to address some of the needs that have been brought up here. That's a piece that Steve and Herb have been working on to enhance some of the tech that we have, not only for kids, but for students, for staff. Second piece that we're looking at is if we were in a remote model. I think last year we were in a situation where we were prevented by order of being in the schools. The facilities were closed. We were in a virtual model, and it was a situation where facilities were open. I see the ability of staff to be able to work in their classrooms as a place to deliver instruction to the best degree possible. So that's kind of a modeling piece. But what do we need professional development-wise? I think there's two things. One, we have to spend time on that PD for how to enhance what we do virtually. And secondarily, when we're looking at returning to school, or if we have kids in the buildings, particularly under the current orders or the current requirements that have the social distancing, classrooms look different. They're not situated in cooperative group learning or some of those collaborative groups that we're traditionally used to working in, small group learning, centers groups. We have to do some work with the ability to provide our staff time to think about how they're going to and provide some development and how they're going to deliver instruction under a different setup, just from a classroom orientation perspective. So those are the things that are part of it, and then you throw in the piece where we have some of our levels that are going to, if we come back in person, just fall within a hybrid model, primarily middle school on up or potentially 5th grade on up. And that being a piece where we have to then look at how we kind of are going to be structuring, again, instruction between the days that we have students in and that blended virtual. So the PD on all of those has a component to it, so that it is significant. What we have built in right now is we have adjusted our calendar to move all of our PD days from the school year to the beginning of the school year. So we've added some time there, but we need to have additional time, particularly once the decision's made on Monday. We start moving forward in a very concerted effort to plan for and provide development for the model that we choose. So there's a significant piece to it.
So, do we have any money in the budget to compensate for that?
The money for any of these type of things, and Steve, you can jump in, but that's part of why we asked for latitude from the board for really planning reopening and COVID-19 ability to start spending dollars. It's similar to purchasing some of the technology. We know we need to do it, and that's a piece Steve is working on, is putting those orders in and then really looking at what kind of dollars we need to find for it. But no, there's not a specific line item right now, but there's definitely, dependent on the model we choose, areas where we can reallocate.
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. I mean, I think it ultimately depends on the educational delivery model, the expenses associated with that, and what reallocation options we can come up with. Unfortunately, the more expensive school reopening options are going to push us in the direction of reducing the planned pay increase that's already there. If we were to go the route, I mean, you'll see this on Monday, but if we were to go the route, some of the in-person models for the youngest students, if Brian could even hire the people, so that's a big if, there's significant costs associated with that. And there's bound to be frustration over what we will have to do to come up with those funds. There's also the other end of the spectrum. The virtual model could result in cost savings depending on the decisions that the board would make. As you know, last spring, we chose to keep everyone whole. That included contractors. I think the board made that decision because this was viewed as a shorter term measure. If this continues into the fall, discussions are going to need to take place about our philosophy behind all of that. Both district employees who don't provide services, direct services to students in a virtual world, and contractors. So depending on which direction we go, there's likely to either be the possibility of savings or the possibility of significant added costs. And then our plan is between July 27th and August 10th to put that plan together. Now, the direction we received from the budget committee was, if at all possible, stay away from what has already been planned for pay increases. The other thing that the budget committee is keenly aware of, you read, maybe saw in the paper today, the governor issued another $250 million worth of reductions to state agencies. At some point, that's coming to us. It's unavoidable. The only way that gets stopped from getting to the public school world is if the federal government provides not just a small stimulus package, but a massive one. If you think about the last one that happened, we received $63,000. I mean, it's almost embarrassing to say that out loud, right? Like 63,000 was our grand total.
Yeah.
So if the state government does not receive a significant investment from a future federal stimulus package, schools will become the primary way that the state can balance their budget. If you read in the paper today, they're looking at the UW system, state agencies,
Yeah.
but the $250 million plus the $70 million that they already cut doesn't even come close to what the state is dealing with right now. I mean, there's estimates to the 1.5 billion range and getting worse. So what the state is doing right now is very minor in the scope of budget reductions. The real money is the state equalization aid funding to schools. That's where the real money is in the state budget. And there's no other way for them, in any, I'll call meaningful way, to find a huge sum of money. So the budget committee is hoping to keep the pay raises there with an understanding that that's the last flexible piece that we have to our budget. If we end up getting hit with a budget repair bill, that is the only remaining piece that could be reallocated to balance the budget. So they're wanting to stay away from that as much as possible. But to answer your question, the additional compensation either becomes an additional cost we have to figure out on top of, let's say, additional teachers with a bring students back to school model, or it becomes something that we can do with reallocating from cost savings from internal staff that we would potentially not bring back in the virtual world, or contractors that we would not bring back.
Well, what do you think about the WTA's thoughts about utilizing contract days for staff development? Is that going to put us in a problem with our state day totals?
I anticipate there's gonna be some level of latitude with the calendar again this year. I haven't heard that that's been approved yet. Definitely been conversations we've had with DPI, and I certainly think that will be something that we will have latitude with. But it would be, again, that's not a,
Is it something?
I think it's pretty safe to say we're gonna have some latitude there, but it's not there yet, Joe. So, I mean, is that a it's a way to accomplish what you're doing without expending additional dollars, because you're utilizing that, but you're taking also, you're moving, you delay the start of school in whatever model we're in by another week.
It also seems to me that this, if we would think about a September 8th start, not just give the staff full staff development that week, but also work with our learners to maybe gradually teach them how they're going to go to school, whether it's virtual or in the classroom. It's just going to be so different. Could we take some of that time and, you know, do kind of like a soft start, say, you know, one grade comes in and figures out, because I mean, just walking into the building has to be different, and during that time, we might have some staff development time to incorporate with our teachers, as well as figure out how learners and teachers connect. I mean, it's an idea without allocating a whole bunch more money.
Just for clarity, when does the contract start? What date for most teaching staff?
The new to our district teachers will report on August 14th.
Okay.
Returning teachers are reporting August 21st.
And didn't we move professional development days up?
We did,
We did.
We added, sort of had 3 or 4 of them to the beginning, so we normally they would have started a little bit later. So under this proposal, what they're sharing is that you would add another 4 to 5 days to it, and if you get some of the things that Joan is sharing, it's kind of a transition with kids. It could probably be a blend of transitions with kids and things for staff. But
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
I guess what I would say is currently, Randy had mentioned, or we did adjust the calendar, which is, as we're comparing to area school districts, I think that what we've in generally the discussion of this planning time or additional planning time is one that is ongoing right now surrounding us. In terms of additional compensation, right now we pretty closely aligned to what all area districts are doing, which is we're providing additional compensation to the teachers on the planning committees. There has not been any area school that I'm familiar with that's talked about providing additional compensation for planning purposes outside of that, although the discussions I think are happening now, and that could evolve.
So the planning committees are being paid.
Their teachers are given a choice. They can choose to either time card for $20 an hour, which is the summer curriculum rate,
Right.
or elect to take points. And so the teaching group that hourly staff that are on those committees are getting their hourly rate if it's outside of their working days or working hours. Other groups are substituting summer days for those committee times. And so everyone on those committees right now is either being paid extra for the extra work, or it's incorporated into what their summer work schedule already is.
About how many people are doing that on these learning committees, planning committees?
This would be very much
Yeah,
I would say generally each committee's probably a dozen folks in total.
And every building has a committee.
All 6 buildings have their own committees going on.
And anybody could join this committee.
Yeah, it was, I did not see every invite, but I saw the majority, and it was just a broadcast out asking for volunteers. I cannot say if they selected folks, if they had more volunteers than they needed. That I'd have to ask principals about, but it was a blanket invitation to folks to participate.
Well, I don't know if we can really, make any firm decisions on this, but I would like to say that, staff need to be compensated some way
Sure.
for whatever we expect they do to prepare for the school year. Because we don't exactly know how we're going to ask them to start. I think it's so variable. So we may have to come back together to further talk about this, but I mean, I just feel they have to be paid some way, points or money. And I would like us to consider, maybe not all 5 days, but have some type of soft start where they get some time, they get to meet their students somehow, whether it's virtually or in the classroom, they practice. I don't know if they're gonna directionalize the hallways. I mean, I'm sure there's so many things that are gonna change. Small groups of kids coming in would make sense to me. I don't know how you feel about that direction.
But I've heard a couple different things bounced around this week. I mean, certainly, I think there's, the decision on Monday will have variations of how you bring kids together
Okay.
or virtual. Those are that's kind of your choice that's going to be in front of the board on Monday. Under both of those models, you could make an argument for a soft start. You could have a soft start where you have kids come in to learn protocols of how you're going to be navigating the building and working in your classroom. If you were virtual, it could be a piece of making sure everybody has their technology, checking in to make sure it all works and you can connect in. So you could do either one. So I mean, there's pieces there that have some validity to it, and then that could be, I think, if that's something the committee is open to and wants us to explore, we could certainly have that conversation. That may not be totally flushed out for Monday. Co-curricular committee met this week, and we are proposing an additional board meeting on August 3rd to deal with some of the co-curricular pieces. So if we're together at that point, some of this could be more finalized, I guess. So if that's something that the committee would at least like us to explore, we can mention that on Monday, just to get the temper of the rest of the board, kind of give some thought to what that looks like, and then we could kind of bring that forward on the 3rd for any final decisions.
I guess the other part I think is important is to reach back out to staff after the decisions are made.
Yeah.
What do they need?
Right.
What kind of time, I'd like to hear from them again after they know what we expect of them. What's a reasonable startup cost to get them prepared to do what we need them to do?
Just what I would say a little bit to that, Joan, is based on last year's teaching FTE, which is not necessarily, not a person per FTE necessarily, but teaching FTE, using that number, if we are adding a day at the summer curriculum rate, $20 per hour, per day, we're looking at about $54,000.
And that's why we
Dollars
probably need
per-
to take
per-
a day.
per day that we would add on for teaching, so almost $55,000 at that $20 rate.
I get it,
So-
but, I think that upfront loading of their skill is hugely important. And if we have to take it from a teaching day, I think in the end we gain. is what I'm saying. You know, we don't maybe have the 55,000, but maybe instead of starting on the first, we start on the second or start on the third.
Right.
Do a different start and make sure they're prepared.
Sure.
Anything else, Brian, you need about that?
No.
Or you need to come back?
Yeah, and I just kind of ask if you can define what your thought is on any flexibility on that first week. Yeah.
I think if we get the permission to have a different school year, you know, the law comes down for that, I think that's an excellent way to go. I agree
think
that.
they're gonna have to give it to
Yeah.
people, because you've got a lot of districts looking at hybrids, which don't fit within their traditional models anyway. So it'll be a piece I can follow up on and see where we're at.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of front-end loading them, both for the soft start for the kids and for the teachers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we could do something like that, but taking in all the information over the last few months, you know, finances is gonna be a consideration for me in my mind come Monday, so, I'd like to know more about that. You know, I mean, there are some, you know, people have stepped up everywhere in this time. I don't think this is any different with our staff, to be able to provide what they do for our community and our students, so.
Right.
But, so I'd like to know a little bit more about finances, more specific.
Yeah. Well, what you'll see on Monday, and that's what is any of the models that are coming forward, there will be a cost perspective to kind of the tech and also the people needs for any of the models. We're trying to put at least a high level cost to each of those or a projected cost. But yeah, that's something we will see.
But it's a good idea, but you know, I'm trying to wait.
I understand.
Before we go on, could I just ask an opinion about one of the things the WTA said about considering suspending the financial penalty to resign in case we ask them to do something they're not willing to do? Do you want some information from this committee, or how do you want to?
Can you explain that to me?
Sure.
As being
What our contracted employees have is considered liquidated damages. So if after June 15th, an employee resigns, they provide the district liquidated damages for having to basically find someone to fill their contract. From June 15th to July 15th, it's $500. From July 15th till the day of the teacher's report, it's $750. And it just went blank on the third, and then it goes up after a teacher's report.
I think it's
Is it 1,000?
or 1,500.
I apologize. I
Okay.
don't know what that third number is off the top of my head, but
I got the idea though.
yeah. And so at this point, anyone that has resigned, or anyone that wants to resign from a contract, that would be something that they would be expected to be paid. They would expect to pay the district to be released. So at this point, we have a single member of the teaching staff that has up for consideration at the August board meeting a resignation, which would include liquidated damages. I think that depending on the model that we choose, it's probably very realistic that some staff could also choose to resign. My personal opinion is that I don't think the number of resignations that we would see are as high as what some of the WT data would indicate, because I think it's a very significant choice for someone to step away from their employment. And I don't know who would be prepared to do that, but I do believe that there will be employees that do make that choice. I just don't have a good sense of how many that would be in the teaching staff.
Will, as in the past, we will be able to consider them not paying that penalty?
Usually what we've done in the past is that we have looked at it as on an individual basis if they've requested it. And then that has come to the board because that is within their contract in order for them to be released. So from an administrative standpoint, we hold people to that unless they request it to be reviewed by the board, because that would be outside of the contract that is signed. And in the cases of where we've allowed it, have been extenuating circumstances. Usually the ones I've seen is when there is a family emergency that's precipitated somebody needing to do that, or a spouse that gets transferred, and then we've done it. But under any other circumstance, we haven't. And from an operational standpoint as a district, there's a reason that it is there.
Yeah.
as
And I get
determined.
that. It would be difficult, but I think there are more extenuating circumstances in this situation which we may want to consider. But maybe we just do that on a case by case.
But wouldn't it be something to, if we aren't telling them what their working conditions are
Right.
until a certain date, it seems like you should have a grace period that, to consider that maybe and say, well, you didn't, if we let you know by the end of next week what the teaching is gonna be, you've got 2 weeks or whatever you want to say, I don't know.
I think, Judy, the piece that Brian's leading up to is once we have our model determined on Monday, he has a survey going out to staff.
Okay.
And that's a piece looking for accommodations under whatever model we land in. But certainly this leads to the dialogue we're having right now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that accurate? What's your timing on that, Brian?
Yeah, well, I think once we are able to, once we're able to identify the conditions in which we're gonna ask people to come back, I do think, and I've seen it done 2 different ways in different districts, surrounding districts that have done that at this point. They either send a letter that details the information, provides some background about what the district will do for protection, and then it asks staff to respond if they are not going to come back. And I've seen other districts that have gone about it as a survey where individuals are identified by name, and it asks them to respond to the survey, and in addition, it asks them to say if they're going to need, if they have special circumstances that they need considered. And I've had conversations with our attorney, because there is some, you have to walk an important legal line there about not making someone identify themselves for conditions of their work until they identify themselves as needing an accommodation, until they identify themselves as needing an accommodation, which again, it's a legal
Yeah.
game, but I've seen it done 2 different ways, and I would say he and I are still definitely in discussion about how we'll do it. But yes, there will be a communication that goes out, and it will ask people to commit to either continuing with their contract if they have one, or continuing with their plan to return to work if they're not under contract.
Do you foresee a timeline for that? Like, are you working on that survey now, so it can go out Monday night or Tuesday morning?
We actually started the conversation last week.
Okay.
I don't anticipate it going out Monday night, because again,
We're gonna be
I don't,
done
not
before
that I don't believe that we will be efficient with our time, but I'm not sure when that meeting will end, and so, but I would say, once we can get the final details in, that I would see the survey going out on Tuesday morning, and giving folks approximately a week to respond to it, so that they have time to internalize it, discuss it with those that they would want to discuss it with, and make that choice. And so getting us that information really, that put us the beginning of August, and then having to take the actions that we'll need to take to, if folks are not coming back, to make sure we have the staff we need.
So you need time to look at each request and be like, we cannot
Yeah.
provide that, or we can, we
Yeah.
are doing this.
Yeah,
And
that
be able to give you a response back and let them,
Yep, that part will be that part will be, obviously, it's individual, an individual review for folks that do choose to identify themselves as needing an accommodation, and then we'll be working through that individually with them. You know, from as soon as they bring that information to us, up until, you know, we get them all finished. And so it's kind of open-ended, because I truly don't know how many folks that will be, and I also don't know what they'll ask. So
And legal will be
Yeah.
stepping with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a,
Yeah,
you know,
for
touchy
sure. Yep.
issue. Okay.
Okay, ready to move on? So the next item is workplace accommodations, modification, philosophy discussion. I'd like to read the bullet points that the WTA has submitted on this agenda item. Bullet point 1, uniform protection across facilities as well as buses, the satellite buildings, and the community sites to which educators travel are essential. This should include private schools and K-4K sites where our staff provide services. Give special consideration to traveling teachers and specialists who work with students between classrooms and across grade levels. We have many teachers in the district who fit this definition. An elementary art teacher, for example, works with every student in the building. Our physical therapist works with every building in the district. Next bullet point, offer flexibility for staff who are high risk or who have high risk family members. Next point, staff should not be required to travel to homes or businesses that aren't held to the same safety considerations or uniform protections as the district buildings, i.e. special ed and community work placements. And I believe the last bullet point is provide clarity of processes and timelines regarding staff requests for accommodations and modifications. So, I see we have a draft that you've made for us, Brian.
I did, yeah, that attached to the agenda. So, this is just you know, for those staff that would either we would identify, or excuse me, the accommodation process would identify as needing remote or off-site work. This is an example of a policy that we could use to kind of govern that. It also would and could be used to guide the work of folks that are not necessarily entitled to a legal accommodation, but whose circumstances we deem a modification request is appropriate. And so I guess this is going to be really general, just because of so much depends on individual circumstances. But an accommodation request is based on an individual's medical condition or personal circumstance related to that. A modification is not a legal protection, is not legally protected, but for example, probably the most common example I can think of, because it's the communication that I've received most from employees, is an accommodation would say, I'm sensitive, I'm at risk because of this. You know, I have a lung disease, for example. You know, that would be an accommodation situation where now we're going to work with that employee over their particular situation. Modification would relate to the one, like I said, which is most common, which is I'm an employee of yours and I am not personally at risk. However, I have a vulnerable family member who is at risk. And my contact with the outside world obviously comes back into my home and can affect them. And so the ADA, or American Disabilities Act, does not provide for protection for a family member. And so basically then, once it is not the employee, it's himself or herself, we're now talking about it's not legally required that an employer would do something anymore. It now comes down to what does the employer want to provide to it, their employees. And this policy could cover anyone that doesn't work on site. In theory, could give some direction to what that work is, how they can become eligible for that work, how it can start and stop, those kinds of things.
So that coverage is or could be extended to people who actually live in that home, not who they may come in contact with, extended family that live outside their home. Is that the way?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So if we were to extend to vulnerable people,
Mhm.
that wasn't them, wasn't our employee,
Yep, but it's their.
but it's somebody in their family that does not live with them.
Oh. Oh, so I even
There's
want.
a chance they may run into them or be around them, but they do not live in that household. I'm assuming we would be looking at people who actually they live with, that may be vulnerable.
Then actually, maybe it would be, you're talking about like a separation of, hey, I have a family member that is, that I visit sometimes.
Right.
I would say that I think that's all subjects that we would want to kind of discuss a little bit. And so when I talk or think about, I guess for purposes of discussion, what I would say is folks that we could have end up with needing to work out virtually and remotely if we're in that type of a model that would permit that delivery.
Mhm.
We would have those that have a legal obligation. Those that are needing, but then I would say after that, it starts to talk about options. For me, the most typical option that you would see would be someone who lives with a vulnerable family member.
Right.
And then beyond that, you start to really get into levels of how might you select who's appropriate for that. Other people could request it without either of those circumstances, right? I think the ones that I would see that would fall on that most commonly would be the ones that say, I am fearful of contracting COVID-19, even though I don't have special risk factors and neither do my family. Then you could start to talk about whether you wanted to consider options like that and how you might ferret those out if there are more people that ask than we can offer to. And then I think this policy also could cover employees that are ordered to quarantine or isolate based on contacts. And so this would give us something to fall back on to say, as you're working at home because you have to and you're able to, this would kind of govern that work behavior.
Brian, why would we want to have that they had to be employed a minimum of 12 months under the circumstances we're working with? We're going to have new employees that we may need to want that 12 month in there.
Well, and what I would say, the reason for it is just certainly having a work sample of someone's.
And I get that.
But
In
I would
normal
say
times.
this policy would not be something that would limit us for an accommodation reason, right? You can't have a policy that says we're not going to follow a federal law. But we can have a policy like this for things that are optional to us.
So it says individuals requesting must have been employed a
Mhm.
minimum of 12 months.
Yep. Yeah.
So a teacher couldn't request if they were a new hire.
That would be for, yes, for the optional situations. And so, and it could be just a language thing that can be corrected, again, draft form for sure. But
this wouldn't and couldn't stop an employee from requesting an ADA accommodation.
Can you give an example, Brian, of something that would be required for a new employee and something that might be optional?
Sure, we can't, we don't, we could hire an employee who has severe asthma and type 2 diabetes. Both of those make a person at higher risk of COVID-19, and so their healthcare provider could say, we are recommending that you are not working in, you should not be working in, you should limit your contact with the outside world for your protection. That would really, because it's their own conditions, we would then be going through the ADA process. Versus we could hire an employee whose spouse has severe asthma or an immune deficiency, has HIV. Then we would be the employee would not be entitled to an accommodation, but we could review with, we could talk with them about a modification. But to your point, Joan, if someone hasn't been an employee for a year, this draft policy would say that unless it's your own personal circumstances where you're not eligible.
And Brian, aren't you fundamentally just trying to get the board's perspective on, A, are you willing to go beyond ADA or not, right? Like as a
Yes.
starting point, either Brian gets directed to follow the letter of the law,
Yep.
which is these requests come in for, that are non-related to ADA, he says no, that's our philosophy.
Yep.
Or B, are you willing to make accommodations? And then also along with B, it has to be tied to the specific job. Because you're not going to make an accommodation under scenario B for someone who has to be an on-site cleaner, right? So
Correct.
you also have to go deeper than accommodations, yes or no, than it is what is your job. And you have to understand, if we open it up to beyond ADA, Brian has to be in a position to make a call. I will do this for some people, but not others. It's the only way that would work.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, there are positions that, regardless of whatever teaching model we pick, the essence of their job can't be performed remotely. And so that has to be a consideration. That's why it is obviously in the eligibility section. But yeah, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that very much. More directly is what I'm kind of first asking is, how flexible as an HR committee do you think we should be as an employer? Should we extend beyond just those that are directly entitled to it, or should we not?
I mean, this is a living document that can be changed after we go back to normal, right?
For sure. Well, you can, absolutely, you can, we as a school board, you can remove a policy or amend a policy in one meeting. I mean, that's.
Yeah, I know that there are people who take care of their elderly parents in the same house, and that I'm compassionate towards. Or we have family members that are going through cancer treatment or something like that.
Mhm.
But somebody who does not live near them or with them,
Mhm.
I wouldn't extend it that far. It would be my first thought.
I would agree.
I also.
I feel we need compassion for their direct living situation.
So vulnerable family members within their home.
Within our living, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they may have to wait to see their grandparents.
Mhm. This is a Randy question, I think. Randy, is this something that we would want to have the board take a, have there be a motion of the board? Okay.
So do you want a motion on this particular policy as
Well,
written?
I would say, I think they're two separate,
Or the
I would say
concept?
two separate things. Right now, this policy would help with anyone that's gonna work remotely. It would give some direction to that. We don't have anything of this nature right now. And I would say this being a separate motion from what we just talked about, which is we as an employer are going to extend the opportunity to ask for modifications to people that live with a vulnerable individual.
Okay.
So I guess I'll make the motion to move this telecommunicating remote work policy procedure to the full board for approval.
Second.
But that's not the motion you were.
That's the first one.
Yeah, there would
This
be
is
up
the
to,
first, okay.
yep.
So all in favor of that?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Then we want a second motion to extend it to family that they live with.
So we are, as an employer, we are open to exploring modifying work conditions for those that live with a vulnerable individual.
So I need a motion.
I so move.
Okay.
Any discussion on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So we're ready to move on to the next item.
Yes.
Which is a review of current sick leave policy related to COVID-19. There's just a couple points that the WTA has included in their comments. And it is develop a full articulated sick leave policy specific to COVID-19, which includes the following considerations. Provide additional district-initiated days for employees who get the virus or who need to care for family members with the virus so as not to deplete employees' sick bank for COVID-related illnesses or quarantine. And secondly, create a clearly outlined policy that states a district-mandated quarantine does not dock time from a staff member's sick days, nor utilize the family first emergency paid sick leave. Okay.
So a little bit of background information. Right now, our employees are given a sick day per month worked, which goes into a bank. All of our employee groups are allowed to accumulate banks of minimally up 188 days. All of the employee groups except for admin and admin support are given an opportunity to have any unused sick leave days paid to them, given a value and paid to them upon retirement. There are two types of federal leaves that would really are part of the FCRA. First is the emergency paid sick leave, and there are 6 circumstances that allow someone to be eligible for this. Emergency paid sick leave does not come out of somebody's personal sick day bank. This is additional days that we as an employer are required to pay, and it's up to 80 hours of time or 2 weeks. We pay them their full rate of pay for their typical hours in a week worked. It is capped at $511 a day, but that cap actually would make it so I think nearly everyone in our district would be eligible for the max of their own day. So here are the 6 circumstances. So if they have a COVID-related quarantine order, so they've been put under an order
They have a self-quarantine recommended. They have COVID-19 symptoms and they're seeking a diagnosis. They are caring for someone that is under quarantine or isolation. They're caring for their son or daughter because their school or daycare was closed. And 6, this one is definitely in italics because it's not yet been put into place anywhere, which is an employee is experiencing any other substantially similar condition specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. That's not happened yet, so there is no clear understanding what that even means. But that's the 6th circumstance that they give us. So this would cover all of those employees' full pay, but it is limited to just 2 weeks of their work.
So is it 10 work days?
10 work days, yes. That's a good clarification, Joan, because for example, if situation number 3 applies to an individual, which is they have symptoms and they're seeking a diagnosis, if they are not diagnosed with COVID-19 and the time period permits, they need to come back to work, and the total number of days
Is just what they use?
stops where it is. And so it's not a one-time shot. You can tap into that 2 weeks up until the point they're exhausted. The second type of leave that comes into place for this is what they call emergency FMLA, and that is very specific in that it only applies to caring for a child that is not able to go to school or child care due to COVID closure. And so that's the only reason you can go in, and that's 10 weeks long. And that is $200, a cap of $200 per day, or 2/3 of an employee's salary or wage, whichever is greater.
And what did you say the time frame with that?
That's
they could-
10 weeks.
10 weeks.
Is this on an annual basis? It says carries on.
Well, thank you, that's a good question. Right now, both of these provisions are set to expire on December 31st of this year. Now, that was when, they set them in April.
Correct.
They said that it's expected that they'll continue them because we're likely as a nation not going to be in a position where December 31st permits the situation to be better. But that has not occurred yet, and right now they are due to expire on December 31st. And the emergency FMLA does count against an individual's personal FMLA allowance. So every individual is entitled to 12 weeks of federal FMLA leave. Emergency FMLA counts against that. So whatever they would use for this, they would not then have access to in an FMLA situation. the emergency paid sick leave has nothing to do with FMLA days and does not count towards them. And so the discussion, and I think what the board members had brought up, I think Joan, it might have even been you that brought it up at one point, is also what the WTA had brought up, which is the district able or willing to consider offering additional leave days for COVID-related reasons beyond what they're already given and what the federal law provides.
Do they have to use their personal days first?
Or
their personal days?
EPSL, for the emergency paid sick leave, they can if they would like, but you cannot require them to.
And how many sick days do new employees start with?
The minimum that they would have would be, let's say teaching staff would be 12, a 12-month hourly staff
A 10-month hourly staff person would get 10.
Brian, do they, you know, when I was employed, we got those up front.
Yep.
Do they get them now monthly?
They
Or
are
do they
they're given to them up front, but they have to work through the year to keep them. So let's say
Okay.
somebody started working for us, we would grant them the days up front, but then they resign 6 months later. If they had used up days, we would subtract that from their last check.
Okay.
But yeah, we give them to folks up front so that they can use them right away.
One thing to consider is there's quite a bit of provisions within the federal law that are very COVID related that do provide protections. I mean, the group that gives me the most concern is kind of like my newest teacher, my newest employee that just
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, there is a thought process that I've had is if you're looking to add days to kind of help keep people whole, it would be for the person who's kind of at that end of the spectrum or who's used them legitimately over time and runs out of sick leave, then we have some protection that they don't, that would keep them whole in some respect. I mean, that would be one way to kind of blend some of these things, but also provide a level of protection if needed to a staff.
The one thing I would say is that if we did go this route, I would highly recommend that it would not be allocated as a blanket allocation to employees up front. It would be given to them in the circumstances only. For example, last spring we gave people those 4 snow days. We had employees use those for days off, but no one. We've yet to have a single employee take either of these 2 federally approved leaves. Now, I say that
Yeah.
yet because
This
I am very confident saying we will definitely have employees that will fall under these 2 circumstances in the fall. I'm
Well, so if a student, so we have a teacher who is face-to-face and they have a student who tests positive, will they be required to quarantine 14 days?
yes. Yep, they
And will
will.
we ask them to use their sick time during that quarantine?
Well, the whole class plus the teacher will be asked to quarantine for 14 days.
Correct.
So the thought we've had is that as long as that teacher is well or asymptomatic, they could continue teaching in a
Okay.
virtual format
Okay.
and not utilize any of their time off.
Good. So the kids would be sent home and if that whole class would just go virtual
And
for
the
14 days.
teacher would be out as well because they would be there, but you could keep the instructional piece going
Yep.
by flipping that classroom virtual while during that quarantine period, at which point the teacher wouldn't need to use any time off.
So the only time a teacher will probably need to use sick time is if they get sick, which should only happen once.
Well, yeah.
We hope
Yeah,
we don't get
I would say, I think it's.
Once for COVID.
I think it's reasonable that, yeah, that they're ill and just incapacitated by that illness, but I also think.
Oh, their
you know,
family.
They could be caring for a family member.
But then they
that's-
could do the emergency FMLA if they're
No,
caring for their.
emergency FMLA is only if they can't send their child to school or daycare, which could be.
When the child is sick or.
If the child's sick, it's actually EPSL.
Yeah.
It's really, yeah, it's like there is, it's.
But
Yeah,
there would be compensation and not sick time necessarily.
correct.
For
Yep.
family members, their own health would be covered by the federal
Yep.
2-week.
And actually, their own family members are covered, care is covered by federal leaves as well. It just.
So there
there's
seems
a
to be
limit.
a lot of program assistance already.
Yes.
But I agree with you, Randy, for our new hires who only have 10 sick days, and if they have COVID and any other,
Mhm.
they'd be out. They'd be,
I guess if you were looking to want to create something that keeps people whole, the place place haven't put my efforts are on those folks that are the newest, that have the look, but they would have to utilize their days first, and then at that point, utilize that. Now, I guess the question, that might be a legal piece, is can you differentiate a type of benefit like that for someone who's utilizing it? Because you're gonna have, obviously, new people. You also may have veteran people who've had other health-related issues that have spent down their sick leave bank. And then you have people who've not used it. I mean, part of what I look at is, that's why we have sick leave as well, is that we utilize it for these purposes. But given the pandemic issues, I think it's legitimate if you want to look at how do you do some protections additionally for staff, it would be for those who run out. That's just top of my mind. So, toss that out there for discussion. Because I think there's a lot of other protections we have, not all of which require you to subtract from your sick leave bank.
Well, I would not be moving to add days, but rather, as you said, keep them whole if they are out of days.
Okay.
But I would like to do that across the board. If we have any staff member who utilizes the, federal 2 weeks and, then has another additional, I think personally, I want to protect those teachers who are nearing retirement, who are counting on this bank of money for health care needs in their retirement, which is where it goes. It's significant. And
Well, I guess I see that as sort of the benefit of not being sick over the years. You have them, but they're also in place as an employer to use when you are sick, not to retire with, which I know, believe me, I know people who use that way. But as an employer, they're there for when you are sick, and so.
I'm sorry, but what I would say is that there's room, right? We cap payouts to employees at 120
yes,
sick
and
days.
I
And
agree.
they can accumulate up
So
to
we got-
188.
Right.
Yes.
So people can go beyond.
It's better than it was. I
Mhm.
kind of fell into that category. I had a major surgery a couple
Mhm.
years before I retired, and I lost my whole sick bank.
Mhm.
And that's significant.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that they have that 50 days.
Mhm.
And maybe that's enough.
It seems like there's quite a bit here. It's sort of uncharted territory a little bit, and so.
Yeah, it's hard to know what kind of individual sick accommodations we're going to end up needing.
So, but yeah, it does sound like there's options. It's not just the one bank of 6 days, and it's completed. There are some options in case of. So if it's not the teacher or the class, but a family member they live with has to quarantine, I'm assuming the teacher would have to quarantine, but they didn't pick it up here.
Right, so.
And so how does that work?
But if they were quarantined, but even if they were quarantined but still well, they could still teach.
Yeah.
They
So
would
would it
go
be-
virtual.
Potential, well, it depends, that wouldn't impact, that's probably a little different because the kids aren't virtual, then the kids are in
Right.
person still, if that's the model you're in. So you probably have to then have some sort of a subs that that's where it gets complicated.
Right, that's bad. That's for Mondays.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's all of your scenarios, that's.
Okay.
Yeah, we have, it's A through L, different scenarios.
All right, I don't get it.
Yeah.
But I think for this, I think.
That'll be for 10 o'clock Monday.
We're gonna try to keep us less than.
Bring out the Mountain Dew and coffee.
Yeah, bring out the
10
caffeine.
o'clock. Jones be
Try to
happy
keep it
miss.
high level.
I appreciate all that research and all of the background and the number of options that are available to employees. I would like to just keep out there that any employee can request individual review of circumstances as we move into this time. We don't know. We don't know what kind of sick time people are going to need and what impact it's going to have individually.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, totally agree. I just, my worry is I live with a lawyer and eat dinner with several of them at times. So is when you start individualizing situations.
Yeah, I get that.
That's a
too.
legal issue that could blow up.
And that's what I don't even know what I proposed as people who utilize them all, keeping them whole, if that falls within any level of discriminatory practice anyway.
A little research for you, Brian.
Is that? Have a conversation with our friend Kirk.
Moving on to our next item, which is staff-related challenges posed by the different 2021 delivery models. Again, I would like to include in our discussion the WTA comments. Several bullet points. First one, develop a documented procedure to follow if someone in the classroom or building test positive. That includes which rooms, hallways, buildings, etc. are closed and who is quarantined and for how long. Secondly, maintain an understanding that if educators are required to work in a hybrid or remote model, their workload should generally reflect the minutes / workday as outlined in the staff handbook. This should apply to all teacher positions as well as paras. Next, guarantee a duty-free lunch even if students are eating in their classroom. Next, establish a formal procedure for how learning will continue if a classroom is placed in a quarantine and how substitutes would facilitate learning if a teacher were to become sick. Next, provide guaranteed procedures and sufficient staffing in high traffic, low supervision areas such as buses, transition between classes, drop-off, pickup, and lunch times. Next, outline how the district will respond when procedures cannot be followed and or sufficient staffing cannot be assured, such as shortage of subs, unavailable bus monitors, insufficient time to clean between classes. Next, determine what tools and strategies are available to teachers to make sure students are following safety protocols. What is the procedure when someone approaches a teacher about a protocol not being followed? Next, train staff on proper PPE use, sanitation, assisting students with personal hygiene, toileting, etc. Next, under a virtual model, clearly communicate expectations of when staff need to and can be in buildings versus working from home. And lastly, additional questions for the virtual model. Identify number of hours per day of synchronous expectation, number of hours of planning, collaboration with colleagues, number of office hours required each day, frequency of required staff meetings, and lastly, can other duties be assigned such as organizing supplies, copywork, etc. for dissemination to students and families. And I believe a lot of that we've kind of talked about, and it appears like it's going to be covered on Monday, but we should probably chat about some of it.
If I can just respond to that real quickly. I mean, part of what Monday is going to be, I don't want to bring out disillusionment. I mean, we are going to be bringing forward, when I look at the K-6 piece, there's a 25-page document the K-6 principals have written. I'm not presenting that whole document in the presentation.
Thank you.
I don't think it's realistic, but what I'm going to do is it'll be a piece that I will give to the board so you can review. And we're just going to hit the different models at a very high level and then put a cost associated with it. There's a few of the models that do not work. That just, and we're going to, because if we've talked about them in public, I want to at least show the cost, and then tell you what doesn't, where does it fall apart there and why we can't recommend it. It'll narrow it down to a few pieces for consideration. But as far as being able, we will be talking about, and Brian referenced 17 different models for quarantine. Yeah, we have a lot on that. Again, I'm probably going to present that larger document to the board and give you a couple high-level examples to just illustrate what it is. but my level of deep dive into everything about what that model will look like, to the specifics of everything with duty-free lunch, which is a challenge, which we have to work through, won't be part of the presentation. It will be at really that high level to try to say, which of these models do you think is kind of what we move forward with? And then that's what we dive into those details, right?
And then these details.
Right.
And I appreciate that they should have and that they want, you
Yeah.
know, our expectations in a
Yeah.
lot of detail, and I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't do that
Yeah.
until we know.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear that that's not an expectation for Monday, because I can't do that.
I agree.
Some of that we have, in some of the areas like they talked about with if a child or a student gets sick, how do we do that? We've dove deep into that world. But there's also pieces that are very much contingent on what we choose, how we choose it, and then how, that'll be also a piece we're working with our building leadership teams to help us figure out. Part of, I think, what Brian's agenda item is here that relates directly to that is, depending on what model you fall into, you're either, none of them, you're adequate, you're equally staffed. You're either understaffed or overstaffed. And I think that was part of what you were bringing forward, Brian, was just to articulate some of the costs associated with what we'll talk about on Monday are staff related. So just as a high level example, if you're looking at a classroom that has room for the teacher up front teaching, socially distanced class kids, you have 17 kids in a classroom. Most of our classrooms are, at the elementary, are 22 to 24, 25 kids. If everybody shows up, if right now we're trending about 15% in the registrations that are wanting to choose virtual. Survey's a little higher, the registrations are a little lower. It may get it down, but it still is going to require us to now, as you look at the entirety of a third grade, add a couple teachers to help get those classes to that 17. There's a cost to that. That's what we're going to be able to articulate. If you go virtual, there's obviously places, transportation, food service, and then some of our support staff that we have to decide, do we have, like in the spring, we kept whole. We have to have a conversation of which ones are paramount for us to operate in a virtual, and which ones do we have to do some other action with that basically is a cost savings measure for a little layoff, etc. I mean, that's not meant to be the decision factor for that model. It's just the reality that there's either going to be a cost or an overstaffing piece depending on what model you choose.
Yeah, that's a great overview, Randy. I mean, I guess the parts that I would point out is that we're not rightly staffed at this point for any of the three models. We're either understaffed for anything that we do in person, because that will require hiring in all areas, or we're overstaffed for virtual. And that is part of the challenge. And for example, when I say that we are understaffed, I can give a couple of examples. One is that in any in-person model that we have, and even in our virtual model, substitutes are going to be required, but they're going to be obviously crucial to have in person. We have surveyed our substitutes. We had about 100, actually like 101 active substitutes last year. And I think I'd mentioned, perhaps I had not, but last year we had, right before COVID struck, closed everything, our county HR directors had a review of substitutes. We were trending at a 92% fill rate, which was the best in the group. Everybody was within mid-80s to 92. But that again was 8% non-filled. Our subs have told us, and I've got right now an 84% response rate on the survey I sent out. 35 of our subs are not coming back to accept work this year. And so, actions that we will take is that we will promote it with, depending on how things go Monday, we're gonna do some we're gonna push some stuff out into the paper for job postings for different areas. We'll obviously push things out to our community via Facebook and Infinite Campus to try to recruit internal community subs. We'll put things out on Indeed and put things out on Weekend for regional and state net. But last year we did all that, and we gathered in 14 new subs to our pool. And that was in better circumstances than what I'm going to be trying to do that in this fall. And so, I'll do all those things again. The job market is different now, but it's not. I think it will be challenging and not realistic for us to expect that I'm going to be able to make up for 35 subs that are no longer in our pool.
So if somebody is qualified to sub it in the Middleton district or Burlington, can they sub here? Do they still have to go through the Waunakee training?
No, there's the folks that have to be trained with us is anyone that doesn't have a substitute teaching or teaching license.
Okay.
And so I think that's something I had also considered is if other schools have gone virtual,
Right.
well, some of their subs perhaps want to work here.
Yeah.
I don't know that, and there's no way for me to find that out until we put them out there. But what you do tend to see is that subs are very regional or community based. They tend to not travel far just because of, they like to work near where they live. And so, while they perhaps travel further, they might, but.
Brian, how has your response to hiring been? Have we had good pools of applicants? Has it been difficult to hire, or similar to last year?
I think it depends. I think teaching pools have been solid.
Good.
I think we still see some real challenges filling custodial positions. In fact, we have open positions right now. On Indeed, we've screened, we've invited folks to interview, and actually our last round of invites, no one wanted to come for an interview. And so, and again, I think that also relates to classified staff. Last year, I believe that we might have had 1 or 2 days that the district actually had all of our para positions filled. Special ed and regular ed. And I had openings the whole year. We would either try to fill them with long-term subs, or we'd hire someone. We never were fully staffed last year. Again, I think the challenge, like I have surveyed our paraeducators, got a 76% response rate. Right now, 17 have indicated that if we're in person, they're not going to come back. To hire 17 paraeducators, I don't have any confidence for that.
If we went virtual, what would happen to our paras?
I think that goes into the situation. Well, what I would say is that conversation here is a similar conversation to what surrounding districts are going to have as well, in that is a situation where if we're virtual, we're overstaffed, and our paraeducators are some of those folks that positionally their duties aren't essential within a virtual model. Certainly some are, and if we have a virtual model where some students are coming on the site, there's certainly the folks that work directly with them are absolutely continuing to be essential. It's more challenging to find essential work for others in a virtual model.
I think it's a mix, Joe. I think we look at our paras depending on what their assignment is. Some of our special ed paras were very active. Some of our paras with younger groupings, I think were more active, and then there were others that didn't have as much activity there, so that's what we'd have to look at. The other piece that I initiated a call with Wisconsin Youth Company yesterday. That's the after-school care folks. Just wanted to reiterate our conversation we had at our last board meeting, and then just share that, told them our decision was on Monday, but also just looking at if there was a point where we were, depending on where our conversation went, but certainly the public health decision could come at any point of creating a virtual environment and what that does staffing wise, but also looking at how they could parcel in or partner, and also if we had any sort of deficiencies of work for any of our staff, would there be any capacity for them to pick that up to create additional childcare capacity in our community.
Yeah.
So at least have that at a high level discussion.
Just another thing to throw out there is we talk about the different models. Obviously, the in-person models, transportation's a key piece. We talked at the board meeting about looking at the possibility of bus monitors. I've read a lot in the last week that there's recommendations on seating charts, social distancing, mask compliance, none of which can be done by a bus driver. I mean, everybody has to acknowledge up front that is not possible. So in an in-person model, we can certainly state that our intentions would be to have an adult bus monitor on every route. But I also think it's important to point out the likelihood of that happening is probably close to 0%. And why I say that is I had a crossing guard position with the same hours as this, I never was able to fill. That's the entire school year. I was never able to fill that job. So you'd be talking 27 positions when I couldn't fill one. I would not want the public to come out of that meeting on the next week and saying, yes, the district is going to have 27 people and they're going to be on a bus and that person's going to do A, B, C, and D. Brian and I do everything we possibly can and we find one person. And then every member of the public is asking, that's not what you said you were going to do. So I do think there has to be a very strong understanding that we can attempt to do things, but that is very different than knowing that we can do those things. And that's what Brian is saying with subs. We can attempt to bring 20 to 30 to 40 more people in our pool. We will do all of our best efforts to do that. That does not mean on September 1st that the pool will be increased by that size. And in fact, we almost have to acknowledge that's unlikely, right? So we're going to get a lot of questions from staff related to these topics. We will be able to do the best we can, but I would not want to say publicly next Monday that if we have an in-person model, I know for sure that the buses will be monitored by an adult on a seating chart, social distancing, and mask compliance.
Right.
Because I don't have 27 people available to do that, and I know I couldn't find one person to work those hours last year. And the hours are significant. They're 4 hours. You can't just add that onto a 6-hour paraday. And the hours conflict with when we need them in school as well. For most, just saying we're going to take our paras and add that to their day is pretty unrealistic. So the staffing issues, as Brian is saying, overstaffed or understaffed, I think we have to make sure that we understand the understaff and what that means. And we can't promise to fix that by September 1st. And I think as you start looking at the decision-making that other districts have been doing, you start understanding why some have selected the approaches they've selected for the start of the school year. Because they understand these barriers and cannot guarantee they can overcome them.
I see our approach, if our decision on Monday is to have any of the hybrid or in-person models, Tuesday is a very articulated plea to our parents and community for here's what we need. And it's going to be the substitute teaching training for people who are not certified. It's the call for people to apply for these positions. So those are pieces that would be absolutely on our immediate to-do list. That's why it's imperative that decision comes Monday, because Tuesday we start running hard. And if it's in person, in addition to the teacher piece, the administrative recruitment here and the communication of what our needs are to make this work will have to be part of that, and that'll have to then be part of our subsequent update every time we come back together as a board.
There were not any action items. I guess I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of that picture. You know, and certainly, as we'll see in the models, it'll break out some of those staffing needs. But I just want to make sure we have, a good shared understanding of some of the challenges of recruitment for many of these positions that we're going to require will be substantial challenges for us to overcome.
The other thing I would just throw out there is you talk about if we end up in the hybrid model, to start thinking about the state government issued furloughs, which is a kinder version of a layoff because people can keep their benefits. So as an example, UW Whitewater furloughed people, did not lay them off. That way staff could keep health, dental, and the other things that they had relied on. So there's different versions of reacting if we end up in the overstaffed approach. And as an employer, that's a discussion you're going to have. Would we want to make sure we keep people with benefits, but not pay them for the wages? Do we want to do a complete layoff? That's really going to have to be a board decision. But that furlough type approach is one that is worth considering. And it has been implemented by forms of state government as a way to at least allow people to continue to access their benefits from their employer. So there's different levels of approaching overstaffing. In fact, the university system right now is mandating furloughs even on staff who are working full-time as a cost-saving measure. So there's different approaches that can be taken, and ultimately if we end up in an overstaffed scenario, that is certainly something that we're going to want to have that conversation about. What is our philosophy going to be, which can range from what we did last spring to furloughs to full layoffs and other options in between.
And is that a across-the-board business decision, or it can be a employee choice if we gave two different options legally?
It's true.
It can be a choice, possibly. Or do we have to pick one or the other?
For example, this is very limited, like UW-Madison did provide opportunity for employees to elect to go into unpaid status. I think what we would want to be doing, and if we set up, is that within a model, if we put someone, we would also, you'd have to identify what are they allowed to step away from, what are we allowing them to keep? Are we going to allow them to keep paying in and get their benefits? I think another key idea that you have to, or key aspect you have to identify is who gets to determine when the person comes back. Does the employee get to say, I want to come back? And does the employer make a call back? Because for some roles, if people elect to take that status, you're going to have to find someone to replace them. If you find, you definitely don't want to have two people trying to do the same job. So I think there's I think there are creative ways to try to do that, but they are, I think it's it's gonna be a challenging spot because it is unlikely that if we go to we're in an overstaffed situation, I don't think we can assume that we'll have more staff wanting to opt out than we need to reduce to. And so we're gonna be in a really we're basically gonna be in a position we've never been in as an organization before, which is it's not good for anyone.
Okay, thanks.
Just a question that I have is, we don't have to talk about it now, we can put it on a future agenda, but it might be some money, and I don't know what kind of contract we have, but our whole clinic, is it open? Is anybody using it? What kind of cost do we continue to pay? Can we discontinue it with our current dean arrangement, or are we locked in for the year? Where are we with that clinic?
In short order, I can say it is still open. We're still operating under the 50% hours that we started in the spring. We're still monitoring usage. Usage is trending similarly to what it does at this point in the year. This is a really quieter time of the year just because so many of our employees are really not active within the organization, so they kind of are not necessarily active within the clinic. And we are in the process right now. Suzanne had her last day last week.
I thought she was.
And so they are, or was it last week, or maybe, it was the 17th was her last day. Their SSM is in the process of recruiting a replacement. We did meet with that one prospective individual and started to talk about a model moving forward. We're moving forward with a reduced hour model from where we're at for keep cost containment, to keep it at what we had budgeted. Kind of the model we're looking at going forward is a 0.6 for the provider, which is 20, that's 24 hours per week, and a 0.8 for a medical assistant, 32 hours a week of coverage, so that we would have staffing, but it would be a reduced level, reduced hours, but hours that match up to what our usage trends have been over the 2 years, to keep us at the budgeted amount. And so, but right now that's still very much in flux. In the meantime, SSM is providing coverage. They're having basically rotating coverage to make sure that we have a provider in there for staff that are accessing it. And yeah, I guess that's the best update I can give at this point.
All right, thank you. Anything else before we adjourn? Anything else you need from us, Brian?
No. Thank you.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Yeah, motion to adjourn?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good.
Thank you. So I appreciate all you guys are doing. This is phenomenal.